Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another PBALC live stream or another PBALC author live stream. Let me make that correction. And as always, we want to thank our sponsor, Southwest 66 Credit Union, for sponsoring all of our 2024 author live streams and making these interviews possible. Thank you to them. Well, just to remind everyone, March, we still have 1 week left in March, is National Reading Month. And what better way to celebrate by hosting another author live stream interview? And today we are so excited to have Kirk Walsh, author of The Elephant of Belfast. Can you see it there? Welcome, Kirk. We are so happy to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's go ahead and get right into it because we only have 30 minutes, Kirk. And there's a lot to discuss. So why don't you start off by introducing yourself and telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I live in Austin, Texas. I've not a native Texan, but I've lived here now for 20 years. So
you're native now.
Native adjacent. And before that, the first half of my adult life, I lived in New York City for about 18 years. And I worked in the magazine business. And also when I was in New York, I went to the graduate writing program at NYU. And that's kind of, there's a lot of these programs now, and they're called MFA programs, and they're a graduate degree in creative writing, but also where you have a chance to study literature intensely. And in my undergraduate, I went to St. Lawrence University in upstate New York. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it a little later too, but I do have some learning disabilities. And I didn't quite land on reading and writing right away because I wasn't a natural. So I actually majored in economics in undergrad because I didn't quite know what I was doing. And I'm originally from Michigan, so I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. But so I'm kind of from different places.
You want to talk a little bit about the great organization that you formed in Austin?
Yeah, so one of the things I kind of got out of graduate school is I taught in a hospital. My team taught severely disabled individuals, and it really was a profound experience. It kind of showed me kind of the intersection of community and writing and reading. And I started teaching in the public schools of New York City. And so when I moved to Austin, there wasn't much in the way of creative writing for kids. And as people probably know, like a lot of public education, there's a lot of emphasis on testing. And so that kind of pushes out the creative writing out of the classroom. And so the organization I started, it's called Austin Bat Cave. The acronym's ABC. I mean, people get a little, they're like, where are the bats? But we provide free writing workshops in the greater Austin area. And we do try to serve at-risk communities. And so we're kind of outside of Austin now because of the cost of living increasing here. So we're more in Del Valley. But as I was saying before we hopped on, we partner with organizations like Girl Forward and juvenile detention centers. Like we really try to reach individuals who might not have access to, support around reading and writing. So yeah, it's been a very enriching experience.
Well, that's great, Kirk, and we'll make sure and promote your programs in our comments if anybody's interested in looking into them as well. So, as you know, Kirk, PBALC, adult literacy, is our primary focus. So why is adult literacy or literacy in general an important topic for you?
Yeah, like I said, so I was not a natural born reader, and I had Yeah, everyone in my family has learning disabilities, and so I was very fortunate to have a mother who was proactive, and was able to, kinda get the support and services, to kinda
Mhm.
help me, but, I didn't really, like you know, I just kind of felt like language was the enemy. Um,
Mhm.
and it wasn't till I was in college, I had a teacher who had a stutter. And it was kind of the first time that I understood that you could have some kind of language difference and still be a writer. And I
Mhm.
started reading voraciously. And I think for me, there's lots of ways in to reading and writing, and I think sometimes our society, particularly now with such a reliance on the phone and, technology, that I know for me, like, reading, it's almost like an act of resistance because it's like you have to, like, set aside time, you have to think
Mhm.
deeply, and it's such a, important practice in terms of reflection, and I think for me, as a writer, reading is just as important as the writing piece. Like, I have to be reading actively as much as I'm writing, and, I was really fortunate in graduate school. One of my teachers was a writer named E.L. Doctorow, and he kinda said to us, he's like, "Look, if you wanna be a professional, writer, you have to be a professional reader," and he's like, "It's just not about reading before you go to bed." And I think sometimes reading gets relegated to the margins of our life. And so, I think if one is struggling with reading, like at different organizations like yours and libraries, there's lots of services um, to help find support, and like book
Mhm.
groups. And like book groups are great for like having goals of just reading one book a month or one book
Yeah.
every other month. But also to sort of enliven the reading experience with discussion, because like my book is a historical novel, but it kind of touches on things that are contemporary.
Yeah.
I think it can be surprising how reading and writing can kind of activate both the imagination but your critical thinking. So yeah, I just feel,
Absolutely.
I know not everyone has a mom like I had, who was able to find me the right people, but it did, even with that, like, it wasn't till I was about 21 that I started reading. Like, it still took some time, even though I had resources.
You can't really separate reading or writing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, and it's so, one thing that I do when I'm writing, like, right now I'm working on a new novel, and, I do write longhand because sometimes it's good to just sort of get off the computer and just sort of have a legal pad or whatever notebook, because it just sort of makes it a little, more focused for
Yeah.
me.
And it doesn't have to be, writing doesn't have to be complicated. When people think writing, you're like, "Oh, I don't I don't know how to write. I don't know how to write a book." And it's like, no,
Yeah.
it doesn't have writing doesn't mean writing a book. It can just be writing, blogging, or writing your thoughts down, or
Yeah.
um,
And the way that I got started writing, so one of the things I did go to a summer program for kids with learning disabilities, and one of my teachers there gave me a journal. And it was, meant to kind of do exactly what you said, but then also he
mhm,
said to me, "Bring me a poem." And no one had ever asked me to do that, and that's definitely
mhm,
sort of, the inspiration for us in Batcave and other places I've worked. It's like just providing that opening of
mhm,
self-expression, that like your thoughts matter.
mhm.
And it, it can be just, you know, starting with a notebook and writing a poem about your day.
Yes, and especially it is especially hard for individuals. We see it in our organization that reading and writing they want to sway away from that because they have a learning disability or a learning difficulty, or they learn differently. And so they're like, no, writing and reading is not for me. But you want to dig in deep, and it's like, why isn't it not for you? Reading and writing is for everybody. And so then you dig deeper and you realize, oh, it's because they have this learning disability that's making it hard for them to read and write.
Mhm.
And so you want to help them work through that.
Yeah, and I think too, like, some of my teachers in graduate school said to me, like, I felt very not like an imposter, but I was like felt insecure, and some of my
Mm,
professors said to me, "You need to think of this as a strength, that you just see language
yes.
a little differently." And I think that's a part of, like, with any kind of language differences, that you try to see it like it can be a strength. It doesn't have to be a weakness. And to kind of move into that so that you can begin to feel kind of a comfort level with language, and finding like the
Absolutely.
books that you want to read, and
Mhm.
finding out which form is most inspiring to you. Like it's such
Yes,
a journey for each person. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And we say that um, to our English language learners, especially, is like, you already know another language, and now you're learning another
Mhm.
language. So you are translating in your mind, things in Spanish or Vietnamese and in English. So you have a superpower.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
definitely a
uh,
superpower.
yeah. So how, I ask this question of all of our authors, how do you develop your characters? Because, I always, when I read a book, after I finish it, I always look at the author. I'm like, how did this person come up with these characters? So how do you develop your characters?
Yeah, so it definitely varies from project to project. For the Elephant of Belfast, the protagonist, her name is Hetty Quinn, and she's inspired by a real a tr- person that in history whose name was Denise Austen,
Hmm.
who took care of an elephant during the Belfast Blitz, which was when the city of Belfast was bombed by the Germans
Hmm.
in the 40s. And I borrowed parts of her life, but, you know, Hetty is 20 years old, so
But
it's
you added some to the character yourself, right?
yeah, I added a lot. And it's definitely, there's a book, like, that same teacher, E.L. Doctorow, around reading, he would encourage us, to read our favorite authors and ask us, "What can we steal from these writers technique-wise?" And, there's a novel I like a lot by the Irish writer, Colm Toibin, called Brooklyn, and that was sort of a book. It's a very simple, not simple, but it was just like one point of view covering a certain amount of time. And so with this book, I really wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want to have multiple characters telling the story. I didn't want to cover multiple decades because I knew it was going to be hard to write about Belfast and all the research. But
Yeah.
the way I kind of found my way into the story is, and what kind of drew me to the story in Hetty was, so the kind of scope of the violence of what happened in Belfast was very similar to what happened in New York City, when the city was attacked during 9/11. And I lived in the city, and I knew a few people who died, and yeah, just had a pretty personal experience with that.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of was the I kind of think of it as my 9/11 novel because I was drawing from that experience, but writing about Belfast. Um, and I think, parts of Hetty's, relationship with her mom and her sister, I drew from my own experience. But I'm always like, one thing that a lot of writing teachers say is look for contradictions in your characters. And you're always trying to like figure out that. But also, like with Hetty, um, to be a young woman in the 40s in Belfast, like, she didn't have a lot of choices, and so
Mhm.
it was challenging to figure out ways to give her agency, like, that's something that's good to have in a character, And so it was actually in the chaos that followed the bombings that she begins to develop agency as a character, and she does endure a lot of loss, but she does get stronger through it. And I when I started the book, I mean, it is sort of about a character becoming an orphan, and yeah, unfortunately, during the same time I wrote the book, I became an orphan myself. Both my parents passed away, but it was like,
Mm.
I didn't know that was gonna happen, and I think that's kind of the, kinda surprising aspect of writing. Like, you don't know what it's like, I thought I was sort of I was creating the characters, but by the time I finished the book, they were sort of teaching me about my own grief, which was very, beautiful in a way. Like, I felt really fortunate to have that experience.
And two, some of the animals in the zoo are kind of orphans, right? That's how
Yeah.
some of them end up in the zoo,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the reason. So the elephant is named Violet. Actually, in the real life story, the elephant was named Sheila, and the S in my name's is Sheila. So that kind of was one of the ways I got connected to the story. But I did I did some research at the Houston Zoo, and the elephant in the book is 3 years old. And I was just very
Mhm.
lucky at the Houston Zoo at the time I was doing my research. They had two 3-year-old elephants, and it
Oh,
was
wow.
pretty amazing. Like, I don't think they'd let me do this now, but um, they let me
You got
watch
to
the
spend,
elephant. Yeah, like I got to stand next to the elephant and
yeah.
watch the elephant. I mean, there were two zookeepers right next to me, but
Hmm.
it was pretty amazing, and it gave me a lot of information, just kind of being next to this creature
Huge
and
animal.
yeah, and knowing what it'd be like for a young woman to be trying to manage an animal like that. And I did, kind of this
And among other chaos that's going around her too.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
and it definitely, it took I mean, a lot of the story is true. I do make up a fair amount, particularly in the last third, but if when people read the novel, there what happens to the animals in the zoo is true, and, it yeah, that part was very hard, but, it also yeah, I wanted to honor kind of what happened, and honor, in a way, the city. I was bringing kind of my experience of being in New York City, but, I think one thing with historical fiction is that we or some of my friends who also write historical novels, it's like we try to find the gaps in history and to write into
Mhm.
those. So, like, a lot of people didn't know about the Belfast Blitz. Like, because Ireland was neutral in World War II, people just assumed that Northern Ireland was neutral too, but
Mhm.
they were actually building arms for the British, not surprisingly. And so that's why the
Yes.
Germans, once they occupied France, were able to fly up there. But it's just a lesser known chapter of World War II history. And that was another thing that drew me in. And wanting, my family is Irish American, and so I always kind of knew I wanted to write about Ireland, but it kind of presented itself in a surprising way.
And you speak about, writing about gaps in history, and when people think about wars, they don't think about, hey, what if there was a zoo in this country and it
Mhm.
was obliterated too? And so what happened to the animals? So you don't people don't think about those kind of things.
Yeah, and actually, unfortunately, with the Ukraine conflict, when that started, I mean, it's hard to believe it's been 2 years now, but when it first started, there were some articles about the zoos and what was, the animals were being transported, but there was an elephant that was traumatized. So
Mm.
it's still an issue in today's conflicts too.
Yes. So can you read a selection for our viewers?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm actually here. Take a so this is in the middle of the book, and it's so the main bobbing is my sip of water. The main bombing is the Easter Tuesday bombing. And so this is after that's begun, and Hetty runs up to the zoo to check on Violet. And I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs, and it's on page 178 and 179. So Hetty ran towards the zoo's rear entrance as the sky lit up again. She unlocked the padlock and flung the gate open. At the elephant house, Hetty found Violet pacing the yard. As Hetty slowed to approach the elephant, her ribs aching from the run, the acrid smell of fresh dung hit her like a slap in the face. Violet released a deep guttural cry. "I'm here, Vi," Hetty said softly. "I'm here." Light gathered and scattered in the sky. Hetty heard the continuing drone of aircraft. Dozens of bombers were up there now, and they all seemed to be approaching from the northeast along the shores of the Belfast Loch and flying directly over the Whitewell Road. Hetty rubbed Violet absently behind one of her ears. The elephant's skin felt cold and clammy. She rested her cheek against Violet's heating side and rubbed the elephant behind her ear again, speaking softly to her the way that Thomas used to whisper to Hetty when she couldn't fall asleep when a thunderstorm rolled over their neighborhood. Only then did she notice the wall of animal cries and howls that surrounded the elephant house. It was different than the other night, louder, fiercer, and it came from all sides, like everything was escalating to another level, another volume, another rung of fear, another circle of violence. As Hetty listened, the fine hairs on the nape of her neck stood on end. The animals' calls gained more definition. The growls of the lions and the leopards, the roars of the black bears, the cackles of the hyenas, the shrieks of the monkeys and baboons, the brays of the sea lions, the squawks of the toucans and macaws. It was as if a call and response were taking place between the animals, and the shadows and darkness transformed into its own sort of mythic cathedral, with all its devout congregants praying in their distinctive tongues at the sacred altar of their greater animal god, with hopes of reaching a higher state, a higher consciousness, so they could endure the suffering of higher proportions. They were singing to something.
Whew. That's a hard section.
Yeah.
There was another section in the book, not to give a lot away, but basically when the bombing started, they had to shoot all the animals in the zoo because they couldn't. They had to prevent them from escaping and attacking locals. That was hard for me to read.
No,
So
it's a hard chapter.
Yes, it just showed that the war affected every aspect. A war affects every aspect of a town, village, city, and this kind of violence just affects everything.
Yeah.
But Haiti, or Violet, the elephant, was so lucky to have Haiti on her side to look over her. So my question to you is, why do you think that Haiti attached herself to Violet versus in any of the other animals in the zoo?
Well, I think, the elephant arrives at a time when Hetty arrives. She's not been at the zoo that long, but I think one of the reasons, and I think this is common, it's not a spoiler to say her sister before the book has died before the book starts. And so she's experienced a considerable amount of grief. And I think kind of sometimes when we can have a focus and of caring and kind of service towards someone else, it can help carry us through the grief that we're experiencing. And, I think kind of, yeah, her kind of side, or the person that's helping her at the zoo, is a young man named Ferris. And I think he kind of told her, like, this elephant's coming, just an opportunity to maybe have a little bit more responsibility. And that is what happened. Denise Austin did take care of this 3-year-old elephant, and she was about the same age as Hetty. So that part I really took from her life. But the family part of the story is, I made that up. But I did find out, I interviewed Denise Austin's cousin, and, she didn't really have much in terms of a family life. Both her parents were sick and kind of bedridden, and she had to take care of them too. And I think the elephant gave her a lot of joy. And I think, like, one of the things I had, when I was writing it, I thought about, like, Hetty thinks she's saving the elephant, but in fact, the elephant is saving her.
Maybe they both saved each other, huh?
Yeah.
And I think too, and I don't know if this was the case with Denise, but with Haiti in the book, I just got the feeling that she was also trying to prove herself in a man's world kind of thing. It's like,
Yeah.
what she wants to be the expert on this elephant so that people seek her advice and kind of finding her place in the world as a expert.
Yeah, and I think one thing about the war, um, because there were men off fighting at war, that it's actually one of the reasons she got the opportunity, because there were less men working at the zoo. But she's definitely in a man's world and trying to find her footing, and also kind of carrying a fair amount of grief. And one of my teachers in graduate school was an Australian writer named Peter Carey, and he defined storytelling as a heightened sense of being alive. And so, like, I felt like my goal with her was trying to make her feel alive again, despite everything that was going on.
And I think that happened when she became the caretaker of the elephant. And elephants as animals are more, they're sensitive to more things than other animals. I have,
Yeah.
just from what I've seen on National Geographic and things like that. But they are more sensitive animals and create attachments to and have emotions.
Yeah, no, they're
So
really, really smart. And one thing that I included in the book is the elephant actually hears the airplanes before everyone else does. Like, they're so sensitive to sound and vibrations.
that would just be terrible to be in that
Yeah.
situation with the animals. So what do you hope is the biggest takeaway that you want readers to take from this story?
Um, yeah. So I think,
So
um,
many.
yeah, I guess, like, the main thing is sort of that resilience can come in a lot of different forms.
Yes.
Um, and I think, like, how, I mean, there is an element related to the Protestant Catholic conflict in the story. And my hope is that people can come together, in times of conflict, and, that they can see beyond their differences. But I think, um, yeah, like, one of my favorite, a lot of contemporary writers, like the writer George Sanders, and he talks about this quote from Chekhov, where he says, you should kind of crack things open just to feel a moment of tenderness. And that's kind of what I was trying to move towards, creating that tenderness between Hetty and Violet, but also, that joy can be found in unexpected places.
And even in the most difficult moments, right?
Yeah. I
War
mean, the
is a
thing
difficult moment.
that was interesting with while I was working on the book, the copy edits, was just the very beginning of the pandemic. And, there were a lot of deaths in New York City and other places. So it was pretty, there's some scenes in these public morgues later in the book. And it was a little uncanny sometimes when certain moments of the book were kind of resonating with the pandemic. And I think we kind of, similar to 9/11, like the pandemic, particularly in the early days, kind of asked a lot of us
But
to.
even, even during the 911 attacks, it's like, I think, all of the United States rallied around New York, I think, and rallied
Yeah,
around, and the differences, everybody's differences, just dropped by the wayside, and we all came together to support, New York and the United States as a whole.
yeah.
So what other projects? You mentioned that you're working
Yeah,
another book. What books are you currently working
yeah.
on, or other projects that you're currently working
So
on?
as I said, I'm originally from Detroit, and so I'm actually working on a book. It's set in a similar time period, in 1943 in Detroit, and kind of some similarities with Belfast in terms of being a major producer of arsenal during the war, but it. I also was drawn to writing about that time because there is a series of race riots that happened in the city um, that preceded the ones that everyone knows about in the 60s. So it's kind of writing into that, but also, it's about a family. It's also about the Black community, and just kind of sort of counter narrative about Detroit because around World War II, Detroit was kind of called the arsenal of democracy. And there's a lot more going on outside of that. So, I've been working on that for, I guess, 3 or 4 years. And then I write essays and book reviews, and I teach. So I stay pretty busy.
Stay busy.
Yeah.
Well, I will look forward to reading the book when it comes out. Um, and because we love reading at PBALC, we think reading is an important part of literacy instruction. What are you currently reading, and what are some recommendations that you can have for us and our
Um,
viewers?
so I'm reading Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, which is a classic, amazing book. I did read kind of the book I'm recommending to a lot of people is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. It's just
Mm-hmm.
a symphonic, funny, sad novel. There's a writer I really love, Jamel Brinkley, and he had a short story collection published last year called Witness, which is sort of paying homage to James Baldwin. And it's a really beautiful collection. Um, yeah, so
Lots of good recommendations in there. Thank you,
yeah,
Kirk. And
sure.
so, if people want to know more about you, the organizations that you run, or if they want to purchase your books, where can they find you?
So if you go to skirkwalsh.com, that's my website. And then Austin Batcave is austinbatcave.org. And my books are, Elephant of Belfast is available at most independent bookstores or bookshop or Amazon. But yeah, it's good to support independent bookstores and
Yes,
libraries if you can.
we recommend independent.
Yeah.
So, can your book be found at any local library?
Yep. It's in local libraries and it is in paperback now. And then there's an audiobook which could be downloaded to the
Okay.
library. And actually, the woman who read it is an actor from Belfast. And so it's read with
Okay.
a accent from Belfast, and it adds another dimension to the novel. It's very beautiful. So if you are interested in Yeah, you can download audiobooks through your library, or Audible too.
Audiobooks read by British authors or any other foreign authors are the best to me. Their voice is
it's
just
very
relaxing to me.
kind of a certain kind of melody to their.
Yes.
So.
Well, I want to thank you, Kirk, for joining us this afternoon, and make sure and check her out on social media and her website and everywhere else. And if you're in the Austin area, make sure and go by and say hi and visit her at her organization. And the Elephant of Belfast is available everywhere where you can. So make sure and add that to your reading list. We PBALC has a readathon that launches in the summer and runs through September. So make sure and add that to your readathon list. And also this year, Kirk, we are giving away a bundle of books from all of our featured authors. So make sure and be looking out for that so that you can be entered to win the bundle of books. Make sure and check out the Elephant of Belfast. Beautiful cover, by the way, Kirk.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful cover. And we'll see everybody. Make sure and log in next time to our next author interview. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.